Don't let the Beatles get you down. Here is a dramatic story that I'll probably remember as long as I live. It was told to me by Robert Moore, of 14 Highland Avenue, Maplewood, New Jersey. I learned the biggest lesson of my life in March, 1945, he said. I learned it under 276 feet of water off the coast of Indo-China. I was one of 88 men aboard the submarine Baya S.S. 318. We had discovered by radar that a small Japanese convoy was coming our way. As daybreak approached, we submerged to attack. I saw through the periscope a Jap destroyer escort, a tanker, and a minelayer. We fired 3 torpedoes at the destroyer escort, but missed. Something went haywire in the mechanics of each torpedo. The destroyer, not knowing that she had been attacked, continued on. We were getting ready to attack the last ship, the minelayer, when suddenly she turned and came directly at us. A Jap plane had spotted us under 60 feet of water and had radioed our position to the Jap minelayer. We went down to 150 feet, to avoid detection, and rigged for a depth charge. We put extra bolts on the hatches, and, in order to make our sub absolutely silent, we turned off the fans, the cooling system, and all electrical gear.
3 minutes later, all hell broke loose. 6 depth charges exploded all around us and pushed us down to the ocean floor, a depth of 276 feet. We were terrified. To be attacked in less than 1,000 feet of water is dangerous. Less than 500 feet is almost always fatal. And we were being attacked in a trifle more than half of 500 feet of water, just about knee-deep, as far as safety was concerned. For 15 hours, that Jap minelayer kept dropping depth charges. If a depth charge explodes within 17 feet of a sub, the concussion will blow a hole in it. Scores of these depth charges exploded within 50 feet of us. We were ordered to secure, to lie quietly in our bunks and remain calm. I was so terrified I could hardly breathe. This is death, I kept saying to myself over and over. This is death. This is death. With the fans and cooling system turned off, the air inside the sub was over 100 degrees, but I was so chilled with fear that I put on a sweater and a fur-lined jacket, and still I trembled with cold. My teeth chattered. I broke out in a cold, clammy sweat. The attack continued for 15 hours. Then ceased suddenly. Apparently the Jap minelayer had exhausted its supply of depth charges, and steamed away. Those 15 hours of attack seemed like 15 million years. All my life passed before me in review.
I remembered all the bad things I had done, all the little absurd things I had worried about. I had been a bank clerk before I joined the Navy. I had worried about the long hours, the poor pay, the poor prospects of advancement. I had worried because I couldn't own my own home, couldn't buy a new car, couldn't buy my wife nice clothes. How I had hated my old boss, who was always nagging and scolding. I remembered how I would come home at night sore and grouchy and quarrel with my wife over trifles. I had worried about a scar on my forehead, a nasty cut from an auto accident. How big all these worries seemed years ago. But how absurd they seemed when depth charges were threatening to blow me to kingdom come. I promised myself then and there that if I ever saw the sun and the stars again, I would never, never worry again. Never. Never. I never. I learned more about the art of living in those 15 terrible hours in that submarine than I had learned by studying books for 4 years in Syracuse University.
We often face the major disasters of life bravely and then let the trifles, the pains in the neck, get us down. For example, Samuel Pepys tells in his diary about seeing Sir Harry Vane's head chopped off in London. As Sir Harry mounted the platform, he was not pleading for his life, but was pleading with the executioner not to hit the painful boil on his neck. That was another thing that Admiral Byrd discovered down in the terrible cold and darkness of the polar nights, that his men fussed more about the pains in the neck than about the big things. They bore, without complaining, the dangers, the hardships, and the cold that was often 80 degrees below zero. But, says Admiral Byrd, I know of bunkmates who quit speaking because each suspected the other of inching his gear into the other's allotted space, and I knew of one who could not eat unless he could find a place in the mess hall out of sight of the Fletcherist who solemnly chewed his food 28 times before swallowing.
In a polar camp, says Admiral Byrd, little things like that have the power to drive even disciplined men to the edge of insanity. And you might have added, Admiral Byrd, that little things in marriage drive people to the edge of insanity and cause half the heartaches in the world. At least, that is what the authorities say. For example, Judge Joseph Sabbath of Chicago, after acting as arbiter in more than 40,000 unhappy marriages, declared, trivialities are at the bottom of most marital unhappiness, and Frank S. Hogan, District Attorney of New York County, says, fully half the cases in our criminal courts originate in little things. Barroom bravado, domestic wrangling, an insulting remark, a disparaging word, a rude action, those are the little things that lead to assault and murder. Very few of us are cruelly and greatly wronged. It is the small blows to our self-esteem, the indignities, the little jolts to our vanity, which cause half the heartaches in the world.
When Eleanor Roosevelt was first married, she worried for days because her new cook had served a poor meal. But if that happened now, Mrs. Roosevelt says, I would shrug my shoulders and forget it. Good. That is acting like an adult emotionally. Even Catherine the Great, an absolute autocrat, used to laugh the thing off when the cook spoiled a meal. Mrs. Carnegie and I had dinner at a friend's house in Chicago. While carving the meat, he did something wrong. I didn't notice it, and I wouldn't have cared even if I had noticed it, but his wife saw it and jumped down his throat right in front of us. John, she cried, watch what you are doing. Can't you ever learn to serve properly?
Then she said to us, he is always making mistakes. He just doesn't try. Maybe he didn't try to carve, but I certainly give him credit for trying to live with her for 20 years. Frankly, I would rather have eaten a couple of hot dogs with mustard in an atmosphere of peace than to have dined on Peking duck and shark fins while listening to her scolding. Shortly after that experience, Mrs. Carnegie and I had some friends at our home for dinner. Just before they arrived, Mrs. Carnegie found that 3 of the napkins didn't match the tablecloth. I rushed to the cook, she told me later, and found that the other 3 napkins had gone to the